All right, guys, chocolate chip cookies and creaming method. Okay, so this is the chocolate chip cookie recipe. I'm doing it in a KitchenAid mixer. If you don't have a KitchenAid mixer, well, if you do have a KitchenAid mixer at home, you're going to use the paddle attachment. The paddle attachment, come on, looks like this. This round paddle attachment. If you don't have a KitchenAid mixer at home, you can use like beaters, or you can use just a bowl with something like a wooden spoon, but you want to soften your butter. So in all cases, you want to soften your butter. So I have softened butter in here that I'm going to cream with my brown sugar. So I have brown sugar. Remember to measure brown sugar. So the butter you're going to cut. The recipe calls for 6 ounces. So you're gonna cut that on the lines, like I showed you in class. And then remember the brown sugar you're gonna pack into a measuring cup and level off the top. And then I have all my mise en place ready together, all ready to go. So you wanna get everything weighed out and then everything you're gonna need for the recipe all together, rather than like running to grab something, and then maybe to end up that you don't even have baking soda, but you've already started the recipe. So I have everything measured out into their own little containers. I'm gonna start this creaming. I'm gonna do it on speed 2, which is fine, but I wouldn't go any higher than speed 2. You don't want to go so fast that everything starts coming out of the mixer. So I'm gonna let it go for a minute, and then I'm gonna scrape down the sides. When you guys are scraping down the sides, make sure you're stopping the mixer. It's really dangerous, like you learned in the safety video, to scrape down the sides while the mixer is going. It can pull your hand and hurt you. So while this is creaming, I'm gonna set my spatula over here. Don't set it on the side of the bowl, because a lot of the times it'll fall right into there, and that could get some of your spatula in your cookies. So I'm gonna sift my dry ingredients. So I have the all-purpose flour, kosher salt, and baking soda. And you wanna sift so you don't end up with lumps and things. So flour is really easy, it'll grab moisture. If you put it away in something like a wet container, so you wanna sift to get any of those clumps out. And then baking soda and baking powder naturally just clump up, so you wanna get those clumps broken down. So salt, kosher salt's a larger flake, so sometimes you can't get it all the way through your sifter. And you want to sift everything. If you don't have, I'm just using a fine mesh sifter like this. See if you have that at home, but some people will have something that looks like this, where you sift like by pulling it, which is fine too. So then I'm going to add my flour in there. And when you guys sift, you want to make sure that you're sifting inside of the bowl. You're not pulling it up like this, because all your flour will get everywhere. And the reason why we measure all our ingredients is so they're accurate. So I'm using my hand, because my hands are clean. Remember to wash your hands before you start this. Using my hands to push this all through. And I have a little bit of salt left over, but that's all I see. I don't see any lumps of flour, so I'm going to put that salt right in there. And I'm going to start stacking my dishes so it's easy for me to clean up at the end. The next thing I want you to do is to crack the eggs. I want you to crack the eggs into a container rather than right into the KitchenAid or into the bowl, just in case you get some shell. So you're just going to smack it on the table and then pull it apart. So I pull it apart like this with my fingers, so holding it with my thumb and then pulling apart with my 2 fingers. But totally okay. I got some egg on the table, so you want to clean that up. Totally okay to separate it with both hands too, until you get used to doing that. So I don't have any eggshell in there, but if I did, I would wet my finger a little bit and then pull it out, because you don't want eggshells in your cookies. So now I'm going to scrape down the sides of this bowl, if you're using the KitchenAid, just to get any of the stray pieces of butter scraped in. If you end up, sometimes if your butter's not too soft, you'll end up with butter on the paddle attachment, so scrape the paddle as well. scrape off the spatula. And then get it back going on 2. And then you're gonna add in your eggs one at a time. So I have, and your guys' recipe only calls for 1 egg. So 1 egg. And once it's incorporated, add another. And then I'm gonna add the vanilla in here as well. And I'm gonna wait for that to incorporate before I'm gonna add my dry ingredients from the bowl. You wanna make sure you have something to land the cookies on, so we're going to portion them out. You can either portion them out with like an ice cream scoop, which I'm gonna do, or just a tablespoon, and I'll show you guys both ways. So once you feel like the eggs have incorporated in, you're gonna scrape it down again. You wanna make sure everything's playing nicely together. Otherwise you'll have cookies that are misshapen. Some will have too much butter in them, some will have too much flour in them. You want to make sure everything's mixed together well, otherwise your cookies will be weird. So scrape down the side of the bowl, and then get it mixing until everything looks incorporated. You're going to turn off your mixer before you add the flour into it, just because trying to get the flour into there while it's going is no fun. So I'm going to stop it, and I'm going to put the flour on the side of the bowl, and I'm going to scrape it in with my hand, the back of my hand. You want to make sure you're getting all that flour that you measured carefully into the bowl and not onto the side of the mixer or onto your table. So all that flour in there. Make sure you guys dry out your bowls before you use them so you don't have wasted flour in there. And what I like to do, especially if it's a small batch of cookies like this, I'll just add my chocolate into here so that I don't overwork my cookies. So but if it's a big batch, if you're doubling it, don't do that because then it'll end up everywhere. So add your chocolate chips, and it's 2 cups of chocolate chips in there. And then mix until it's incorporated. And then we'll mix it some more with the rubber spatula when it comes out of here, just to make sure everything's mixing well. Or mixed well together, sorry. Okay, so once I feel like everything looks like it's mixed, another thing about the KitchenAids is they have this little bump at the bottom, and the ingredients like to get stuck in the bottom of that little lump. So I make sure, again, that's why I mix a little bit more at the end. So somebody broke my mixer last year, so I use this one, but it takes a minute. So yours at home shouldn't be that hard to do. So take off the paddle attachment, and then you're gonna remember, clean off your mixer, clean off your tools once you're done with them, and get them out of your area. Okay, so for this cookie dough, I am gonna get everything off the paddle attachment. That's all delicious cookies. And then I'm gonna use the rubber spatula I've been using to just give it a good mix before I start portioning them out into balls. And I like to, once I portion them out into balls, I like to freeze them for at least a half an hour. That makes it so they don't spread as much and they're just a better cookie. If you can wait and refrigerate them or freeze them overnight, you'll end up with an even better cookie, which I'll show you in a minute because I put some in the oven just to show you guys how to bake them. So, same thing in all cooking. You want to make sure you have the same size, otherwise it won't cook the same. So that's why portion scoops are really nice, because they're all the same size. If you're going to use a portion scoop or an ice cream scoop, don't use a huge ice cream scoop because it's really hard to bake cookies properly that way. But you want to make sure that you have a nice full scoop and you clean off around the edges, and then you're going to put it onto a tray. And I'm going to put these just side by side because I'm going to refrigerate them, and then you'll see how I baked them in just a minute. So scoop off around the edges so you have a nice round scoop. But if you're going to do a tablespoon, which probably most of you are, just try to get the same size every time and you'll be able to feel. So get a scoop of it and then round it out in your hands and you'll be able to feel if that, you know, don't do that and then one like that, because they're very different sizes and they won't cook the same. So try to get the same size every time. So you guys, once these have been frozen or at least refrigerated for a half an hour, then you're gonna bake them off. You're gonna bake them off at 350. If you're doing balls that are about this big, it's like about 3 tablespoons of dough, just enough to round it out in your hands like this, like the size of a golf ball. Those will take 15 minutes in the oven at 350. If you're doing smaller, they're gonna take less time. I'm gonna show you guys how I set my timer. I had cooked balls like that. I set my timer for 15 minutes and it's gonna go off any second. And I'll show you how to check for doneness. That guy's a little small and it's okay to pull some off of there to make sure that they're the same size. So I'm gonna keep doing that. And make sure you guys are washing your hands, and if you happen to eat cookie dough by accident, then wash your hands so you're not contaminating your food. And clean your dishes as you go and your workstation. If you spill egg, make sure you're washing your hands. If you spill flour on the floor, make sure you're sweeping up. So your parents keep letting me let you cook. So I'm gonna show you guys these cookies. So there's a few things to look for when you're pulling out cookies. And these look pretty good. You're always gonna wanna pull them out with 2 oven mitts, remember? And I have this big tray. You guys won't have this big tray at home. But you can see when you're baking cookies, you don't want them to be shiny at all. So if these were underdone, the inside would kind of glisten, or the inner circle would kind of glisten a little bit. You could see almost like it looked wet. So these don't look like that. They're totally matte and cooked over. They have a little bit of brown on the outside, which is good, but they'll still be soft in the middle. If they're still wet looking, they're not done and they won't continue cooking. So a lot of things will continue cooking when they come out of the oven. And these will continue cooking a little bit, but it won't, if they're wet in the middle, it won't continue enough and they'll be totally raw and I won't check you off. Okay, so that's how you do it. So I'm gonna put these into the freezer and get my space cleaned up like you should do. Make sure you're washing your dishes correctly and sweeping your floors and cleaning up like good kids, right? Okay.